Okay, well, this was a bit of a surprise. About a month after I recorded the Refine Edge and Legacy Refine Mask video, I discovered that the audio was completely corrupt. It was nothing but static. So this is Eric from a different time and place. I'm going to go ahead and re-demonstrate the Refine Edge, Refine Mask. So this is kind of an interesting predicament because I do not know where my script went, so we're just going to wing it a little bit. Essentially, the Refine Edge is a way to refine the edge of a selection or a mask. So in this case, I'm going to do one thing first. I'm just going to duplicate this mask layer. Let's take a quick look at what we had from a little while ago. Let me get my move tool up. Let me get my zoom tool up with a Z on the keyboard and zoom in. Looks like it needed quite a bit of refinement still at this stage, so this is a great place to start. So I'm going to turn off this lower layer. And now this is something interesting. We'll deal with this a little later in the class. If you turn on a duplicate layer, sometimes that will show you opacities that you wouldn't have noticed before. All right, so in order to get to this, you need to essentially do one of two things. To get to the current version, you can just click on a mask that exists, or if you don't have one, you could just make a selection, and that would work as well. Then hold on, just duplicate that, make this guy, just again in this window, grab a lasso, pop. All right, we've got a selection. Life is good. We can make the mask here, but you have something else you can do. You can go up to select at the top of the screen here and choose select and mask. And we've been here before. This grants us several abilities, including the ability to refine the edge, refine the mask. And hopefully that was in a video that I did prior to this one. Otherwise it will come in a minute. I'm a little lost as to where I am in the timeline. So from here though, there is a secret. If you go up to select, and I've just clicked once and I've released. If you go down to the select and mask and hold down the shift key, this will bring up your legacy mode, which will be Refine Edge. Now notice it didn't really go to a whole different workspace in the same way that the select and mask did. In fact, this is the old school legacy mode, and it has different views. Marching ants, overlay, on black, on white, white on black, on layers, reveal layer. So, you know, various types. So for me, in this case, I think on white would be probably pretty useful. So a heads up too, if you have an older version of Photoshop, this should still exist. Bringing up the select and mask or refine edge should come up. Now notice right now we're in the refine edge mode, and if we had clicked on one that had a mask instead of a selection, I'll just deselect for a second, turn that off so we're here. If we go up to select, hold down shift and click select and mask, it will say refine mask instead of refine selection. And you can see the behavior will be a little bit different between the two if you experiment with it. So let's go ahead and go back in time to this selection, and we'll go ahead and do the refine selection first, and we'll get going. So holding down shift, clicking select and mask will bring up the refine edge because I had a selection and I was not on a mask. Otherwise, holding down shift would have brought me to refine mask. So the part we're interested in here is the show radius, which allows us to actually see what Photoshop is considering the selection. And so if we increase the radius, this is the selection. This is the, I guess you could say, the zone that Photoshop will be trying to detect the edges in. So this is great for refinements after the fact. It allows you to do some absolutely amazing stuff. And you'll see that we have a couple of tools. We have a refine radius tool and an erase refinements tool. We have the ability to adjust our edge by smoothing it out, which we won't see too much going on because we haven't painted anything yet. It can't really figure it out. We can increase and decrease the contrast. We can feather it. And then we have the same outputs as before. watch out for decontamination of colors, decontaminate colors. That will actually edit the original underlying photo. So you'll notice when you click it, it knocks you out so that you can't just create a mask. You have to create a new layer or a new document with layer mask, but you can't just add to it, because decontaminating colors will change thin areas to have a different color on it, so that it will be less wispy, less invisible, that sort of thing. So to really get in here, well, we could just paint in and try to find the edges that way going in, but it would probably be better to actually turn it off for a second and get in and start doing refinements. But you notice, because my selection is so sloppy, coming in with this brush probably is not the way to go, simply because of the fact that that we're so far away from the edge. Like, we could try to, we can paint it in, but we're still going to have another edge here. I just pressed the space bar while this was still highlighted. That's why it kicked in the show radius. You can also press J and it will just do it. So rather than just start with a sloppy selection, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to close it up. I'm going to get rid of this layer. We don't need a duplicate right now. I'm going to come over to the little lion here that has all of this green goop. This seems like a great target to try to get this set. So I'm going to click on the mask layer. Notice I don't need a selection. I'm going to hold down, as long as you have a mask, you don't need a selection. You're going to go to select. I'm going to hold down shift, and I'm going to click on select and mask. Once select and mask is open, you can see the controls will function a little bit better. So I'm going to start in with the brush, and if you paint over it, it will try to figure out what you're doing. So it's trying to refine the edges as best it can. So I'm just going to do a quick demonstration, because you guys are champs. You've been watching a ton of videos, but I think you'll kind of get the idea. Notice how it's just disappearing here? The reason for that is, if we show the radius, it's trying to guess. And what we really want to do is make a smart radius first, and then we want to increase the radius a little bit. And look now how thick my brush was. It was uselessly thick. So you can click and hold here, and that will allow you to get the Erase Refinements tool. I'm going to use the left bracket key to shrink that down. And I'm just going to paint away a chunk of it. Now, if you have a Wacom tablet, this is way easier. Mine is currently off, and I'm not sure all you guys do have them, because why would you go for such a big expense so early in your career when you could get it later, when you could use it like as a tax deduction or something and go through. So let's go ahead and keep refining these edges, and let me just show it as it is. And now you can see, and I'm holding, oops, watch out. I keep holding down the space bar. That's usually how I switch to the hand tool. I'm going to be a little more careful here and click the hand tool. That will get me off of the show radius button. See how the whiskers are starting to come together? I did it again. I immediately held down the space bar. So what happens if we just paint right over hair? This will start telling Photoshop that we're trying to get this hair. So I'm going to go ahead and increase this, and I'll go over it, and look at that. It's knocked. It actually did a really good job here. It's knocked out a big old chunk of it, and it's doing its best. Now, if we switch it over to black and white, we'll notice something. It's painting in grays and things, and this is good. This is something that we would have to do if we were blending, because while black conceals and white reveals, gray will do 50% of that at exact middle gray. If it gets a little lighter, it will reveal a little bit more. If it gets a little darker, it will hide a little bit more. So just going to paint over this, and it'll cause Photoshop to try to guess as best it can. So I'm going to shrink this down with the left bracket key again. Left bracket key and right bracket key are great in these cases, because they allow you to do brush adjustments in places where otherwise it might be difficult to find where the brush is supposed to go. So I'm just going to keep painting over it. So a few other things. We have the ability to smooth this out, and this is a little easier to see what it's doing in the black and white view. You can see how literally it's trying to, it's like a posterization effect mixed in with, and posterization effect is just reducing something down to a handful of tones or colors. So it's reducing this down further. So rather than having a high fidelity mix of whites and blacks, we end up with these big swaths, smooth swaths. And it tries to smooth it out. And so once it's done that posterization, it tries to stretch it. It goes, do I need these jaggedy edges? I don't think so. I think I can guess a smoother semicircle. And so it does so. So feathering is just as you would expect, a blur on it. That's the same thing as feathering a selection, and then switching over to the quick mask mode, you'd see that a feather is just grays. It's a blur. It's a whole gradient of stuff. All right, and then we have contrast, which will just crank up the contrast. Voila. And you have shift edge, and this is actually surprisingly useful. In many cases, shifting in will sometimes get rid of artifacts that are popping up without having to do a lot of work. And so that essentially is your refine mask tool. Refine selection is similar. The algorithms, if I remember correctly, the algorithms have always worked a little bit differently between the two of them. I'm doing it again. Get the hand tool, don't hold down spacebar. But the big thing is, if you got used to the legacy refine mask tools in earlier versions of Photoshop, and you just want to get back to that way of doing things, it's still there. It's just a hidden feature. And if you don't have a newer version of Photoshop, that's fine, because using this refine mask palette is going to give you many of the same tools for refining the mask. You may have to do a little more legwork early on, but you have the same sort of stuff to dig in here and recalculate. I'm going to get rid of some of the smoothing. I don't think it's doing me any favors. There we go. I think that'll actually work better, maybe even with a higher contrast. There we go, because I don't need that excess that's popping out. Okay, and I'm going to pop this over to the on black real quick, and we can see where I've painted over. It's done a good job. Where I haven't painted over, we've still got all of this green. So you can imagine where I'm going next. I'm going to try to get it to calculate what I consider an edge and mix it in with what it considers an edge and refine it down. I think it's doing a pretty decent job. Ooh, that was a good cut, actually. So you want to go in and play around with this until you find something that you like. I don't know if I've covered it yet in this timeline, because again, I had to come back to this a little bit later. But doing calculations in combination with this is really great, because you can further refine the mask based off of other work. I think that this is going splendidly, though. Take a look at that. And notice it does have to recalculate a bit on my machine. So if you've got a slightly older machine, you may have to wait from time to time, because it will look like the mask is gone and then suddenly will pop back in. Don't worry too much about that. Let's go in and paint that. So again, these are starting points, and you can use this with all other tools. Keep in mind that you can always access the, let me press OK. Where do I want to output this? Now I'm not decontaminating, so I can edit my layer mask. If I hit decontaminate colors, then it would require that I make a new layer altogether. But I'm just going to target the layer mask, tell it OK. And now my layer mask will be a little cleaner. Still a lot of work to do. If I just worked over that, it would get it eventually. Another thing you can do, if you keep this in mind, coming over into your layer mask by alt-clicking will grant you direct access. For the most part, we've been painting, but if you want to dig in and do some crazy stuff, you also have the ability to use the same filters that you would use on a normal layer. So for example, if we added noise to this thing, look at this nonsense. Check this out. It scatters in your background just a little bit. Oftentimes, you will never want to do this, but you do have, see, it's just mixed in a little bit. But sometimes you'll want to kind of do a different form of transparency. Now, there is a transparency mode on a layer that allows you to do a dissolve in a similar manner. We'll talk about that later in the semester. But if you don't want to use dissolve, you can use instead noise on the layer mask. Now, a little more usefully, oh, look how much better it came out on the place where we refined the edge. Really need to go over the rest of this area with this single thing. A little more usefully, you can come in here and use things like sharpening tools, like the on-sharpen mask, or you can use blurring tools like a Gaussian blur to make things tighter or looser. So the sharpening, such as on-sharpen mask, sharpen, on-sharpen mask, one of my favorite ones, can allow you to tighten things in because it will try to make it sharper and sharper. And Gaussian blur will try to make things blurrier, which will make the mask looser and looser. Let's see. Now here's a problem. We made it crispy because I went in with on-sharpen mask and I looked at an area that wasn't really being affected, but the area with the thinner pieces certainly was being affected. So if I undo here a couple of times, you can see how it cut in. Actually, I'm so far zoomed in, it looks like we could do even more work on this. I would actually recommend going back into the holding down Shift, selected mask, coming back in here, and now that we're on black, start adjusting. Let me check one more thing. Blending change. Oh, I've also changed it to dissolve and forgot to undo it, so that will cause some weird effects. There we go, that's better. So pop back. That's another thing, when you're playing around and experimenting, always make sure that you put things back the way you found them. Oops, pressed F5 there. All right, so hopefully that gives you a good overview of the legacy select and mask. The algorithms, I've said this before, I'll say it one more time, the algorithms are a bit different on doing the refined selection. So in other words, what is an algorithm? You may ask. It's a way that the computer will approach something so that it attempts to get the same or a similar result every time. But you can randomize it, so then you just get a similar randomization every time, which is kind of weird. So think of it as an algorithm is a recipe that the computer is trying to follow to make something happen. So if you gave it a muffin algorithm, it would try to make tasty muffins. If you gave it a refine mask algorithm, it would try to refine your mask. Kind of makes sense. But the approach that it takes in both making, say, blueberry muffins versus chocolate chip muffins is different in the same way that an approach to doing a refined mask versus a refined selection would be. The ingredients it's using are different. Sure, it's a muffin, the flavor's different at the end. So you'll notice that some behaviors are a little bit different. I'm not holding down the shift key, even though it's the same sort of tools. So in this case, why was I not holding down the shift key? I wanted to hold down the shift key. I escape out of there. Go to select, hold down shift, and do select and mask. All right, here we go. So if we were to go back through this and again, you could see, zoom in. I just pressed Z on the keyboard to get that. You could see that it would kind of be a little bit different, especially in the smooth, if I remember correctly. Like I said, it's been a little while since I did this. So I want to paint that out. Now notice too that it's not bouncing around as easily because my selection that I started with isn't very refined. So it's having to do too much heavy lifting in order to get going. So what would be the best approach to this? Come in with a better selection, because if you click away, it's not going to do anything. If you click over on the edges though, it would work better. So I'm going to turn on Smart Radius so that it tries to figure stuff out. It does a pretty good job, I feel. If you feel as though it does too much work, then you can turn off Smart Radius, and that's fine. Turn on Refine. And I keep hitting spacebar. All right, and there we go. So notice right now it doesn't seem to be doing anything. Well, if we turn on the show radius, we can see why. We've got another radius on the outside. Essentially, the selection's interfering with the work. So you really do have to cut in a lot better. So just one last demo on that. I'm going to grab the lasso tool with an L. I'm going to hold down the Alt key. I'm going to really dig in, just so we'll have a chunk so I can show you what's going on here. So I'm going to come in again, holding down Shift and going to Select and Mask. So now we're in Refine Edge instead of Refine Mask. Now if I come in, see, we'll start pulling things out. This is the behavior that I'd really want and really expect. But notice too that it is doing it differently than the Refine Edge. It's got more of a cotton candy feel to it. Sometimes this is what you want. It doesn't hurt to try everything, but a lot of times it's not going to be what you want. I think that the Refine Mask tends to be a little bit better. Actually, it's doing really good color cleanup though. I am kind of shocked. Wow, look at that color cleanup. It did do a really shockingly good job on that. Well, color me surprised. Haha. All right, so that's essentially the Refine Edge and the Refine Mask tool. Remember, you have to use the Shift key to get to them. If we flip this into Quick Mask mode real quick, see that some of the adjustments, I think I canceled instead of saying okay. Sorry about that, guys. So we can't actually see the adjustments there. Okay, I'm going to pop this one in to replace the other static one. So if you're just kind of perusing my channels and you ran across a mysterious video that was just absolute static, now you won't know why. It was some sort of audio issue where it corrupted all of my audio on the original file, which meant that there was no re-rendering it. It just had to be re-recorded. All right, enjoy the rest of the video series.